Ain't as good as it once was. I know that's right.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. The meeting will now come to order. I'll ask everyone to stand for a moment of reflection, followed by the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. Thank you. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. You may be seated. We've published an agenda. It's presented. Look for a motion to adopt the agenda as presented.
So moved. Second.
Thank you, Reverend Newville. Thank you, Mr. Betway. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Agenda is adopted. We'll adhere to the agenda. Mr. McElroy, safety briefing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We start every meeting at JEA with a safety briefing for our staff and guests. We are on the 19th floor of the JEA tower. In the event there is an emergency here and we are required to evacuate, we will use the exit to the left of the elevators where we came in. We will go down this 19 flights carefully, holding the handrail all the way down, 3 points of contact, and we will assemble on the southeast corner of Church and Main. Mr. Brost is here for CPR if necessary, Mr. Hobson for security, and 911. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. McElroy. No one wants CPR, especially not from Mr. Bross. Ms. Brooks, our Chief Legal Officer, will give our Sunshine Law public record statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know how to follow that, but this is a duly noticed public meeting that has been advertised. There's a quorum present, and minutes will be taken, and we're in good shape to move on. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brooks. We'll now hear comments from the public. If you'll please come to the podium when your name is called, state your name and your address for the record. Ms. Bonnie Malley. Afternoon, Ms. Malley.
My name is Bonnie Malloy. I'm an attorney with Earth Justice, a national nonprofit environmental law organization that is deeply concerned with the recent changes and proposed changes to JEA's net metering policy. The recent change to a 15-minute and the proposed instantaneous net metering policy, coupled with the rate reduction to compensate solar customers for their excess generation, will effectively destroy net metering and end rooftop solar in Jacksonville. These proposals are nothing more than an accounting gimmick that replaces net metering with an entirely new billing system that cheats the customer from receiving fair value for the solar energy that they produce and allows JEA to make a huge profit off turning around and selling that same energy at a much higher rate. Florida law requires much more, and in fact places an ongoing obligation on JEA to provide a true net metering program that allows a customer to be able to offset what they consume with what they produce. Fundamentally, an offset necessitates that the solar energy generated receive the same value, or at least the same value, as the energy that has to be purchased from JEA. Instead, under these proposals, the current or the new solar homeowners' bills will double, cutting their savings of solar generation effectively in half. This loss of savings will mean that it takes them twice as long to pay back their initial solar investment, moving from about a 12-year payback plan to a 22-year payback plan. The degradation of the value of rooftop solar is about 66%, will destroy any incentive for new rooftop acquisition in Jacksonville, which violates Florida law that requires JEA to promote, encourage, and expand renewable energy resources like solar. JEA has even recognized that solar is one of the cleanest and most abundant renewable resources, so why is it now disincentivizing the expansion and encouragement of solar? JEA has proudly claimed on its website that it's ranked in the top 20 cities in the nation for solar generation, but now it's quashing its net metering program and proposing to use one of the lowest rates in the nation to compensate solar customers for their excess generation. Under this phone net metering program, customers will be cheated and rooftop solar will come to a crashing halt. These proposals violate Florida law and should be voted down. Thank you for your time.
I apologize for mispronouncing your name. Thank you, Ms. Malloy. I appreciate your comments. I appreciate your perspective and your opinion, and the board respectfully disagrees as evidenced by its decisions taken at its last board meeting. And I can assure you that every part of our solar program is in compliance with both federal and Florida law. If you feel differently, I'd ask you to submit your thoughts and comments on that subject to our Chief Legal Officer, Ms. Jody Brooks. Thank you for your comments. Next, Angela, I'm going to mess it up, DeMalbrin? No. How do you say your last name, Angela?
DeMalbrin.
Okay, I was close. I'm going to blame your handwriting.
Okay, yes, that's fine. That's fine.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. My name is Angela DeMonbrin, and I'm the Florida Program Director for Solar United Neighbors. And I'd like to read a letter I have here. I'm here to express our deep concern over the Board of Directors' recent changes to the JEA net metering program. The program changes set to take into effect April 1st, 2018, as currently designed, are inconsistent with the recommendations from the months-long stakeholder process and were unveiled with little time for review and comment. Based on analysis from the solar industry, we believe this change will effectively halt Jacksonville's adoption of rooftop solar regardless of the newly adopted battery incentive programs. Customers that interconnect with JEA after March 31st will, rather than being credited the retail rate for power that is provided to the grid, get a credit at the fuel rate, a mere 3.25 cents. JEA's decision to undercompensate new PV system owners for the generation of solar drastically undermines the economics of private investment. Under the new rate, the payback period of a typical residential system will increase by an average of 10 years, which will have a chilling effect on the adoption rate of solar if new PV system owners do as JEA wishes and invest in battery storage to completely offset all exported solar energy. The payback period for this total system would increase by 20 years, even including the 2000 rebate. Who would go solar? I'd also like to add that we develop solar co-ops through the state, and Jacksonville is truly not leading on this whatsoever compared to other metropolitan areas in the state. We had a movement to develop a solar co-op for the Jacksonville-Duval County area in January, and that has been suspended until we can see some sort of fair compensation for solar homeowners that are contributing to the grid. We ask you to revisit the decision and go back to the stakeholder process and their recommendations of extending this to a 25 megawatt cap. We ask you to revisit that, and we would be more than willing to help you along with the past stakeholders as we research all of this. So again, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. DeMondron. George Covers.
Good afternoon, board members. George Cavros with Southern Alliance for Clean Energy, 120 East Oakland Park Boulevard, Fort Lauderdale, Florida. I was here last month, provided some comment briefly on the solar policy, and just wanted to offer some follow-up solar comment now that we've had a little time to actually review it. First of all, we want to applaud JEA for moving to add 250 megawatts of utility scale solar power. We've done some internal analysis and have found that in 2020, on solar watts per customer, actually JEA will be the leading utility in the state. But that's not the only solar sector that needs to be robust if you want to build a community and a resilient community in Jacksonville. I'm here today to ask you not to forget about your residential customers. We've got some concerns with the net metering policy, some of which I expressed last time I was here, but let me start with a stakeholder process, and maybe you can hold on to this for future reference. But I would ask that in the future, if you have a stakeholder process, you don't have your stakeholders in a silo here, while your staff is hammering out policy over here. I'll be honest with you, stakeholders felt blindsided by the policy when it was announced. It was announced and passed within a matter of days, and that's just, simply no way to build good solar policy or to build community. You heard earlier about the instantaneous metering. And, we've got some concerns about that because it effectively ends net metering. You're treating your customers like independent power producers. You're paying them, 3.25 cents going out and 10.5 cents for what comes in. So there's no ability for them to actually offset their energy use. And maybe it's a conversation I need to have with Jody. But that seems to be inconsistent with the state's net metering law. I'll just refer you to Section 366.91 on that. And we've got some concerns about forcing customers onto batteries and providing this sort of very harsh economic signal. It's sort of you take it or leave it. That certainly doesn't promote customer choice. This is an untested program with no empirical evidence that it would work. So it would be really nice to have that evidence, wouldn't it? So what we're asking for is that before April 1st, before this policy goes into place, that the board consider revising the policy or having the policy run as a pilot program for a year or two so you can actually get some real field data on what's going on. Again, it's an untested policy in a market with no mature battery market. So we just ask that you consider revising or running it as a pilot. We feel that's the best way to build good solar policy and to build community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Cavros. Our old friend Tom Larson. Come on, Mr. Larson.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Tom Larson. I live in Jacksonville Beach, and I've long been a glad participant in the community clean power stakeholders discussions with JEA and other members of our community for a long time. I would like to add my voice to those suggesting that the policy change that has been undertaken is not going to accomplish what we believe will be the good pathway for our community. And while I have not prepared statements for today, I have done a lot of analysis and conferred with staff over the years on whether it be clean air emissions or clean power prospects. And I would like to invite JEA's staff and even board members to join us in a renewed commitment to workshopping these ideas and the prospects and the analysis so that there's a deeper understanding among our perspectives so that we can maybe cast a better pathway. I really feel that we've made a very large shift that has caused those that have been thinking about getting into the clean energy future to take a pause. I think you'll start seeing in your numbers likely a slowdown in the number of PV systems that enter into your system. And I think the battery world is not well enough understood by anybody for us to be able to commit the whole policy regime to basically a battery prospect. Now, I applaud the thinking and the direction. I do believe that batteries will be a major part of our future, but how do we get there as a community? How do we make that transition? How do we help people stay in the game while we develop that battery prospect, which is good for all of us? So my feeling is that we have maybe jumped a little too far, and maybe we should come back and review together the options, and maybe we set up more than one set of options for the smaller participant in the clean energy. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Appreciate your comments. And finally, Warren Clark. Mr. Clark?
Thank you all. My name is Warren Clark, and my wife and I wanted to go solar in St. Augustine about a year ago, and we got bids from a number of different companies for doing that, and we didn't know quite what to do with it. We didn't know which one to choose. And then we saw a sign in St. Petersburg that looked a lot like this, only it was the St. Petersburg Solar Cooperative. And then we came back to St. Augustine and worked with a community organization that has a lot of credibility there, Compassionate St. Augustine. Basically, its motive is how to treat others the way that you want to be treated. And don't treat other people the way that you wouldn't want to be treated. And so with that, then we formed the St. John Solar Cooperative about 6 months ago. We just closed the timeline for it to be open. 200 people signed up for it. And I was just talking with Lynn Willis today, who lives in St. Augustine. He is as excited as he possibly can be, because the very first solar installation from our cooperative is going on his roof right now. It's A1A Solar that's doing that. That is a local company here in town. And there are 8 men and women that are on top of his roof putting on solar panels right now. And he is just thrilled with that. He's thrilled because that is his contribution as an individual to the future, to the next generations and the next generations out. I grew up on Beauclair Point, on the river. I watched the sea level rise. I saw the river rise and fall a lot of times when I was growing up, particularly with Hurricane Dora. What happened here last year with the record flooding that we had on the St. Johns River is the precursor of what will happen in the future. I think you're doing a real disservice to the citizens that you're serving in this community by taking these steps to effectively monopolize and force out anything other than your own generation of power. It's not either or, it's both and. We as citizens want to do this, to put solar on our roofs, and now it's financially feasible to do it through the cooperatives like this for the average homeowner, and you're blocking that. And that does not help us as we prepare for the future generations, but particularly of all of us that live along the river, because that flooding is going to get worse and worse as the sea levels rise. We need to do everything we possibly can in our power to use all the resources that we have as a community in order to have individuals as well as you as a power company working together on this towards clean energy so that we have a good system and river and sea level in this area to pass forward to the children that come after us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Appreciate your comments. You know, the board appreciates comments of all the stakeholders in the solar community. We appreciate you coming and sharing your thoughts and opinions today. I mean that sincerely. This is a dialogue that's been going on for some time. I'm disappointed to hear that some stakeholders feel that the policy was a surprise. It was a product of 18 months of community dialogue between JEA staff and stakeholders in the solar community. We believe the board reached the right result. Just to respond to a couple of things I heard the commenters say, JEA is not in this for a profit. We are a nonprofit organization. Nobody here is taking home a profit. There's no shareholders. We represent the ratepayers within the JEA service territory. And our duty is to them to make sure that we're honoring the entire constituency, and not just the residential solar constituency. So if we have the opportunity to pay utility scale solar and the net metering prices reduced our fuel rate, well, that just means that the other ratepayers, the rest of our constituency, is getting a better deal. Now, does that extend your payback as a residential solar? Yeah, it probably does. But I dare say that the payback is shorter now than it was 10 years ago for the early adopters because of the dramatic decrease in PV pricing and the capital investment required to install residential solar. So these are just some of the things that we have to take into consideration. So I appreciate your perspective. I appreciate your perspective on behalf of your constituency. We have to listen to a larger constituency. So I'm not closing the door on revisiting this, but you need to understand that this was also the product of a long and very thoughtful discussion and deliberation within JEA and with the other stakeholders. So I appreciate your comments. Thank you for being here today. We're going to move on with the agenda for now. So I would turn to, actually, Councilman Schellenberg, before I get to you, I'd like to recognize Ms. April Green. Ms. Green, would you stand up? Ms. Green is nominated for appointment to the JEA Board, subject to City Council confirmation. She'll be joining us in December, and we look forward to it. Thank you for joining us here today, Ms. Green. Thank you. And now, Councilman Schellenberg, our council liaison. I would be happy for you to go to the podium. It's rare.
First of all, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity, Mr. Chairman. I read in the paper yesterday that there was on the agenda, it's 2A, you're going to extend the possible contract to the developer for another 90 days. And almost in the same article, I see that he negotiated a contract with a hotel on a piece of property that he does not currently own. So I reached out to Mr. McElroy in regard to this issue, and I just wanted to bring a couple points up. During the last year, I have reached out to the developer, and during that time, he said there was going to be no problem in closing on this property going forward. And here we are, 30 days to the end of the contract, and not only is it potentially going to be extended for 90 more days, but now we have the city and the DIA, I understand, getting involved in this. And if I'm incorrect, and I'll make the correction later, but this is what Mr. McElroy's had. Then I said, ask Mr. McElroy, is the city going to pay the $18 million in cash? And what I got was those terms haven't been negotiated out at this point in time. I think that 3 years is long enough, and talking to many developers over the years, is plenty of time to close on the deal, move forward. Extending the contract I don't think is beneficial, and if we getting the city involved in the DIA was not the original intent 3 years ago. If the property was available, they made a bid. The JEA and the rightful authority gave them the right to negotiate, but 3 years is plenty of time to go forward. I would like to say if there's negotiation going on, I would like to be part of it. On the benefit of the City Council, since this contract ultimately will come back to the City Council. And I would like to be part of the negotiation and the formal discussion going forward, because I have many other questions that I'd like to address and as a concern, not only as a City Councilman, but as a liaison to this JEA, but as representing the City Council of a whole, because I think these questions will come up if and when this goes forward. So I greatly thank you very much for your time, and I appreciate it, as I always do, being invited to this. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councilman Schellenberg. We really appreciate your support of JEA and the City Council, and your sincere interest in what's going on here. We will have a report from the Real Estate and Government Relations Committee later in the agenda, at which we'll take up a proposed extension of that contract. And again, appreciate your thoughts on that subject. I agree with you. 2.5 years is a long time, and further extensions bear close scrutiny. As you'll hear later, one of the conditions that has been required by JEA for that extension is that previously soft earnest money deposit go hard. So we share those concerns, and we're taking steps to protect JEA's position in any extension. So thank you for that. Next, Dr. Gaffney, Office of the Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm back here. Thank you for all your work, and I want to make sure that I acknowledge Ms. Green, our future board member, and these things we appreciate all you all do. But I have nothing else to report today.
Thank you, Dr. Gaffney. Appreciate that. Next on the agenda is MOSH presentation. Ms. Stewart.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and board members. I am fortunate today that I get to introduce a very brief video on JEA's current exhibit at MOSH. It's called Power Play. About 240,000 citizens each year go through the exhibit, and that's really all I wanted to share with you. I want to introduce the video now.
For a lot of families, JEA's Science Theater at the Museum of Science and History is the best show in town. Kids get charged up when a Tesla coil generates 1 million volts of electricity, or when static electricity makes their hair stand on end. If JEA's Science Theater is the main show, then JEA's Power Play exhibit is the perfect warm-up act. Located right outside the Science Theater, it opened in 2013 to teach children just how a community comes to life through electricity.
I think that people come here every single day and they learn just a little bit about how energy works and how their world is powered. So I think that's a great thing. It's a great contribution to the museum.
At JEA Power Play, children learn ways to save energy.
You turn off the lights whenever you leave a room, and you need to insulate your attic and stuff.
They learn just how much energy it takes to power, say, a computer. And they learn the power choices that must be made to generate energy.
A dam idea sounds good, but they could also wipe out a lot of species because, you know, if you build a dam, the water will stay on one side but not the other side. So that could cause a problem.
We use fossil fuels every day, and we use a lot of fossil fuels to run our cars and stuff.
Electricity is amazing and powerful. Both of these exhibits are designed to teach JEA's youngest customers just that.
Thank you, Ms. Stewart. Electricity is amazing. That takes us to 3A on our agenda, the consent agenda. May I have a motion to adopt the consent agenda?
So moved. Second.
Thank you. Moved and second. All in favor, aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, we're at 3B. Call on Ms. Angie Harris to present the proposed amendment number 1 to the St. Johns River Power Park System Employees Retirement Plan restate.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members.
Morning. Good afternoon.
In your board packet, there's an agenda item summary along with the memorandum with the subject of St. Johns River Power Park System Employees Retirement Plan restatement. My comments thereafter would be relevant to that particular document. The board previously adopted and approved 5 amendments and the restatement of the St. Johns River Power Park System Employee Retirement Plan. These amendments collectively captured any changes that had been made over a period of time, as well as captured any type of IRS regulations that had changed relative to that plan. It's pretty much recommended by pension experts as well as tax experts to periodically to make these changes, restate the document, and then submit that to the IRS to have a letter of determination issued. All of the changes for the adoptions and amendments had no financial impact on the plan, and they were merely updates to make sure that the plan was up to date as stated by IRS regulation. Once these amendments had been approved and amended by the board and adopted, the plan was sent to the IRS for the letter of determination to be issued. I'm pleased to report today that the IRS has issued that letter of determination indicating that our plan meets all of the criteria as a tax-exempt qualified plan. One of the things that the IRS did ask us to implement, which is in the board package that we presented, which is contingent upon the overall impact of the plan, is they asked that we take a couple of the statements that we had in the plan where we referred to some IRS regulations, and they want us to implement the entire verbiage in there. So for example, if we refer to IRS code 21.04, as opposed to referring to that code, they want us to list the entire IRS code in there so that anyone looking at that plan document does not have to go out and look for that IRS regulation, but will actually have it stated there in the plan. So again, those things are purely cosmetic and also recommendations, but the IRS has issued us a favorable determination. So what we're asking the board to do today is to approve the agenda item as we've submitted so that we may restate the plan and have it presented to the employees as well as put it out on our document board.
Thank you, Ms. Harris. Do I hear a motion?
So moved. Second.
Thank you, Mr. Petway. Thank you, Reverend Newbill. Any discussion on the proposed amendment? Mr. Cumber.
Angie, so what happens with this plan after the St. Johns River Power Park is closed?
Okay. After the power park closes, we do have employees who are eligible to retire, so they will receive retirement funds from that plan, as well as we have employees who will remain in that plan and will receive benefits upon their retirement eligibility. So it will be more of an administrative standpoint that will be involved with the plan.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? All in favor of approving the amendments, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Iris.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Dykes, fiscal year 2017 operating budget line item transfers. Did you spill your water?
I did. Oh, boy. This is
Safety
not starting off
briefing.
Well, it really is.
Safety briefing to no good.
Thank you.
We're already over our RIR. Come on.
Oh, goodness gracious. All right, here we go. Hopefully the rest of us we're behind tab 3B2
Thank you.
in your binder. This first item relates to budget transfers at year end. Last month, the board approved a delegation to allow for the managing director to make transfers within the budget up to $5 million within a fiscal year, and at year end, as needed to close out the fiscal year with ratification after the books closed for the year end. This is the ratification for the transfers that were needed for the last fiscal year. So if you'll flip to the first page of the agenda item, on the bottom of that page, you see a table with the transfers for the electric system. As a quirk of our budget, we can budget for bond buyback, but we actually have to transfer that money to principal in order to spend it for the year. And so you see that transfer there with $1 million added to clean up a bond maturity during the year. The remainder of the transfer was coming in under budget for O&M, non-fuel purchase power, and the emergency reserved, and those funds were transferred into our capital fund to fund future capital expenses for the electric system. So that's a summary of those transfers. If you'll flip the page on the water and sewer system, the majority of these transfers are into the capacity fees line item. We have an obligation to fund capacity fees in the amount actually received for the year, which required a transfer into the capacity fees line item of $5.8 million. That was funded by coming in under budget on the line items that are listed on the left-hand side, and with a small amount left over for a bond buyback transfer. So we're asking the board to approve and ratify these transfers for year-end for fiscal year 2017.
That's it. Thank you. May I hear a motion to approve the budget line item transfers for 2017?
So moved.
Thank you, Mr. Cumber. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Petway. Any discussion? Questions for Ms. Dykes? Hearing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Carries. Thank you, Ms. Dykes. I think you're still up.
I am.
Amendments to prior board authorizations for fixed-rate debt refundings.
Behind tab 3B3, this item is asking the board to consider and approve an amendment to an authorization for refundings that was approved in December of 2016. That authorization was a 2-year authorization for staff to execute opportunistic refundings in the market, subject to a specific list of parameters. So in other words, it said as long as these refundings meet these specific parameters, then the board would pre-approve and authorize the execution of those refinancings. We're back today to ask for this amendment because of an opportunity that's come up that's a pretty unique opportunity. There are 2 tax reform proposals currently in Washington, one in the House, one in the Senate. Both of those proposals preserve tax exemption for municipalities. Both of them eliminate the opportunity to do what's called an advance refunding, which is a unique refunding opportunity in the municipal market. An advance refunding, most refinancings that are done are typically done at the call date for the underlying bonds that are being refinanced, and the IRS rounds. So within 90 days is considered to be at the call date for IRS purposes. And that means at any given time, there's only one set of bonds outstanding for any capital project that's actually funded. The quirk in the municipal market is that we're allowed a one-time option to do what's called an advance refunding, which means we can actually do a refinancing prior to 90 days before a call date for bonds. And we do that by issuing bonds to fund a defeasance escrow. We issue bonds, we buy securities that are exactly sized to completely pay off the original bonds. And then we just have those new bonds on our books. So for our purposes, we only have the new securities that are outstanding. For IRS purposes, there's actually 2 sets of tax-exempt bonds that are outstanding on the same capital project, the same original capital project. The ability to do that is proposed to go away as of December 31st of this year. And the impact on us is we have a fair amount of securities that still have that option built in. We have not exercised the one-time option to do that advance refunding, which could be worth a fair amount of savings to our customers. So we'd like to go ahead and do that before the end of the fiscal year. There isn't certainty that those are going to go away. There isn't certainty around the future of tax reform in general, but there is risk. And the risk is that if tax reform is implemented, because that legislation is in draft form and exists currently in both the House and the Senate, if anything is implemented before the end of next year, 2018, it would be retro back to December 31st. So unless we go now, we run the risk of completely losing the opportunity to go. The delegation that was approved in 2016, on the second page of the memo that's included in your package, there are a list of bullet points that delegate the specific parameters to staff for executing refinancings. Those are not proposed to change at all. They're just here as a restatement of what's already been approved by the board and delegated by the board. And those parameters in general require us to essentially shorten up debt when we can. Where there's an average life restriction, which is no greater than the weighted average life of the refunded bonds plus a year. It restricts the savings opportunity. So for advance refundings, we need to achieve at least 7.5% present value savings. And it's got a list of other parameters there. And again, none of those are proposed to change. The only change that we're proposing with this amendment is to increase the dollar amounts that are allowed to be refunded by an aggregate of about $850 million, because we think that's the maximum size of the opportunity given the rest of the parameters that have already been delegated. In connection with this, provided that the board approves it, there's two other items that will be needed from board members in connection with the refinancing. The first is a certificate that we'll be asking board members to sign. It's a certificate as to public meetings and no conflict of interest. And all the certificate basically does is confirm that this meeting was conducted in accordance with public records laws in the state of Florida, and everyone has complied with those laws. And confirms that there's not a conflict of interest with any individual board members that have approved this delegation. The second thing that we'll be asking board members for is later today you'll be receiving an email that has a draft of our offering documents for this refinancing. And as public officials, and I'm going to read some text here from our attorneys to make sure I get this exactly right in terms of your responsibilities. As public officials who have ultimate responsibility to approve the issuance of debt securities and related disclosure documents, and that includes board members. The duty exists under federal securities law that public officials may not authorize disclosure that he or she knows to be false or misleading, or while recklessly disregarding facts that indicate there is a risk that the disclosure may be misleading. Further, the SEC has stated that board members may reasonably rely on the work of government employees in this disclosure context, and nothing in the SEC's position mandates that a board member need to read each page of a disclosure document before approving it, and these are rather lengthy disclosure documents. Reasonable reliance can be established when the board member is satisfied that the disclosure process is reasonably designed to produce accurate and reliable information, has a reasonable basis to have confidence in the integrity and competence of the staff and financing team, and does not know of anything that would cause such board member to question the accuracy of the disclosures or that would indicate that they are misleading, or know of any potentially material issues that should be brought to the attention of staff and the financing team for further explanation. JEA has established procedures for preparation of disclosure to investors, and we review those procedures and provide a certification to board members at the Finance and Audit Committee every spring. We most recently did that in March of 2017, so that is a current certification. And that email, again, with the draft offering document will be provided to board members later today, and we just ask that you provide any comments that you may have on those documents by Monday. And that wraps up this agenda item.
Thank you very much. Do you need a motion to authorize the amendments?
Yes.
Yes,
So
sir.
moved.
Thank you, Revenue Bill. Second, Mr. Petway. Questions? Mr. Cumber?
Melissa, what's the magic to the 7.5? I wasn't following the math as to why advance refunding shall not be less than 7.5%.
That's a statutory.
It's a great question. It's not statutory. That's by board policy, and that's been in existence since before I joined JEA. The reason for a difference between the authorization for a current refunding and that threshold and the authorization for an advance refunding primarily relates to the one-time option, or the one-time nature of the advance refunding option. So as the board delegated that authorization to staff, what was delegated is a recognition that the options aren't equal, and therefore the savings threshold should be higher for an advance refunding than it would be for a current refunding. The reason we didn't recommend changing that parameter in this request is because of, frankly, the volume of securities that we're already talking about pushing out into the market. I don't think we're going to be able to do much more than we're already asking for without paying a price penalty on those. And so even without changing the delegation, I'm not sure we could do much better on savings.
Okay, so just so I ask it more specifically, given that there's a chance that this could go away, you don't feel lowering that threshold to give you optionality would make a difference?
Let me think about this way to answer that question. Having the additional flexibility might be helpful. The only reason we didn't ask for it is because at $850 million, which is what we're talking about, we're already going to be pushing a lot of bonds into the market.
Okay.
And if we lower that threshold, all that does is increase the dollar amount that we'd be pushing out, and I'm not sure we can get much more done in December.
Okay.
What is the estimated net present value savings?
It's significant and will depend on market conditions at the time that we price, but it's upwards of $10 million.
Worthwhile exercise. Any other questions? Mr. Petway?
Yeah, I just have a question on the timeline and the sensitive political aspects of all this. Are we okay with the December 31st number in here, or we come back if we get through that, or we just don't worry about what happens until something doesn't happen?
December 31st is the magic number in the tax proposals in the House and the Senate. So that's what's been proposed as the cutoff date for advance refundings. From a timeline perspective, I sure wouldn't have picked this timeline. It's very, very short to try to get this done. That said, we've got, if I can brag on my team a little bit, we've got a great Treasury staff and finance staff who's going to be able to get it done in the timeline that's required. But it's not ideal. It's compressing 8 or 10 weeks worth of work into 3 weeks.
Is that right? Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Any other questions? All in favor of the motion, please say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Ms. Dykes. I think
you.
you're still up.
I'm on a roll.
Financial and operational review of the ratings agencies.
The next item was put in the board package before the tax reform proposals were introduced. And so originally, we had planned to talk about what we were going to be discussing with the rating agencies at our meeting in December. That meeting has now accelerated in order to allow the rating agencies to get through their credit process so that we can get into the market in December. So rather than being in early December, a December 7th and 8th meeting, these meetings are going to happen tomorrow. So this is a preview of what we're going to be talking to the rating agencies about tomorrow. And if you'll flip to the third page of the PowerPoint that's included in your book, there's an agenda for the meeting that we're going to be conducting with the rating agencies tomorrow. Broadly, these meeting with the rating agencies focus on the significant developments in each of the electric and the water and sewer systems, and significant credit factors for each system to bring them up to date on what's happened since last year and wed those up with any criteria changes that the agencies may have since last year so that we can hopefully address all of their concerns in a single meeting and come out with a rating that is favorable to us. If you'll flip to page 4, page 4 is simply a recap of the assumptions that were approved by the board, or discussed with the board at last month's meeting. And these are the assumptions that are used to build our financial projections that we then share with the rating agencies for the 5-year window that they analyze. And page 5 are the results of those projections. And so what you'll see on page 5 is very robust projections for the electric system that are supportive of our credit rating. On the debt service coverage front, there is a drop in debt service coverage in 2022 that's projected, and that's a result of the first Vogtle unit coming online in 2022. Otherwise, going across, debt to asset ratio continues that trajectory downward, which is important, and liquidity looks healthy throughout the projection period. In the water and sewer system on page 6, a similar story. Coverage is robust throughout the projection period, continued improvement in debt to asset ratio. And liquidity and cash both look healthy. There is a drawdown that's planned of the capital fund in the water and sewer system, which is contributing to that decrease in days of liquidity. But overall, very supportive of our credit ratings generally. Page 7, we have our financial advisor, Public Financial Management, analyze the value of our credit rating each year, and they've done that again this year, and this just recaps the value of that to us. There's value in our ability to access the capital markets, and our ability to procure credit facilities on a cost-competitive basis, and they've estimated that value to us is about $90 million over the next 10 years. In other words, a downgrade from a AA rating to a single A rating would cost our customers $90 million more over the next 10 years. And this is provided just for information, and that wraps up that agenda item.
Thank you very much. No action required. I'm sorry, you're still
I'm on a roll.
on the clock.
Next item is behind tab 3B5. This is a recap of the fiscal year end results for fiscal year 2017. These are the financial results that will be presented in the financial audit that we are finishing, knocking on wood as I say this, hopefully on Friday of this week, and that will be presented to the Finance and Audit Committee the first week of December. On page 2 of, oh good, I've got a PowerPoint up there. On page 2, there were some themes that emerged from a financial results perspective through the last fiscal year. On the electric system on the left-hand side of this page, the theme was really at the top driven by sales. We had pretty anemic sales, which is sort of what we were expecting for the year. We were right at about 12 million megawatt hours for the fiscal year, which drives base revenue. From a debt service coverage and liquidity perspective, we posted very good results for last year, which are supportive of our credit rating that we have. And then flipping down to capital expenditures, we did come in below where we expected, but also remembering we had 2 hurricanes last year, which influenced, obviously, our work flow for the year. On the water and sewer system, the theme again is sales, but it's in the opposite direction. We had more sales growth than we were expecting, which drove up revenue for the year. Debt service coverage, liquidity, and debt to asset ratio are all outstanding. In fact, I would and will argue that they are reflective of a credit that is a rating higher than the one that we currently carry from 2 of the agencies. From a capital expenditures perspective, we came in a little below what we were projecting for the year, but still significantly higher than we've been, and that will continue to trend upward through next year. I'm going to skip, in the interest of time, the metrics page and flip right to sales. This just shows sales trend over the past number of years in the electric system and how that trend breaks down. So we did come in 4.1% below prior year, which is a pretty big drop in electric system sales, but consistent with what we've been planning for the year. And that, from a results perspective, translates into revenues about $36 million under budget, again, driven by sales. On the expense side, I'll highlight the fuel expense came in at $442 million and was buoyed by fuel fund transfers of $48.4 million. If you look at the bottom right-hand side of this page, there's a little chart that talks about the fuel fund. Our beginning balance in that fuel fund was $180 million, and we are beginning to spend that down. That was according to plan. We shifted from doing fuel credits to actually lowering the fuel rate and projecting withdrawals from the fuel fund each year a couple of years ago, and so this is consistent with what we were projecting at that time. Flipping back up to O&M, O&M came in under budget but over last year, and much of that is due to salary changes that were associated with pension reform. So as that was implemented this year, that drove up some of our O&M expenses for the year. Net result, though, is $62 million net revenues over budget, which is very supportive of our credit position. And capital, again, is recapped at the bottom of that page. Excuse the duplicate page that was included. On the water and sewer system, boy, was last year an interesting year from a sales perspective. Up until halfway through the year, we were talking about double-digit sales growth in water sales. And as we got more and more rain through the summer of last year, that really backed off significantly. So we ended the year at 2.4%, but that 2.4 doesn't tell the story at all about what was happening month to month in terms of water sales variability. In the center part of that page on the bottom, there's a chart that talks about rainfall. And it's a pretty interesting data point. In terms of number of days of rain, which really drives irrigation more than total rainfall inches, we were about the same year over year. Rainfall inches, we went from 31 inches in 16 to 73 inches in 17. So we had 2 big hurricanes that contributed significantly to that, but that's a very big change in precipitation patterns for the year. From a financial results perspective, ended up $40 million over budget for revenue. That's driven by sales. On the O&M expense side, came in under budget over last year, and again, that increase over last year was driven by a combination of two things. One was the contract implementation for the pension reform changes on salaries. The other was our storm resiliency program, which increased our O&M expenses for the year. On the capital front, you see that trend. If you start in the middle column, that 16, going from 147 to 188 over to 205, and I do think we're going to end up over $200 million this year. That's a pretty significant trend, and worth contrasting with where we were 3 years ago at 74. So it's capital tends to be cyclical in terms of capital spend in the water and sewer system in particular, and we're really seeing that with this hill part of the cycle over the next couple of years. From a debt and debt to asset ratio perspective, we've got $1.5 billion that's been repaid in the electric system since the peak, $500 million in the water and sewer system since the peak. It's great progress. We still have a ways to go in electric. The debt to asset ratio, that black line on the left-hand chart, you'll see tick up for next year. It's going to tick up when we close the St. Johns River Power Park. We are going to have an asset impairment that's going to go along with the plant closure that will cause that to tick up slightly, and then we'll continue that trend downward again after that. And overall, weighted average interest rates, not much change here since last time we talked about it, but hoping to bring that 395 number down a bit with this refinancing next month. On the variable rate debt risk analysis, we have renewed a liquidity facility with U.S. Bank last month. We've got another 7 or 8 that are coming due in 2018, but no issues with those renewals or our ability to access the credit markets. And then from an interest rates perspective, you can see our current curve here in red as compared with the prior month and prior year. What's interesting is if you look at bands of what's happened over the past year, it seems we've picked a low point by just picking the day a year ago. And we're actually probably right in the middle of where we've been over the last year with that red line. And on the investment side, our yield's up to 131. Rates are looking good. We're below the median for both electric and water on the rate front. And the last 2 slides that are included in this update are arguably the 2 most important slides that we will share with the rating agencies. And what those do each year is compare what we told them we were going to do last year for this fiscal year with what actually happened. Both of these slides are a great story again this year. And on the electric side, we've posted coverage, cash, liquidity, debt reduction, and debt to asset ratio all better than we told them last year. And not hugely better, but enough better that it supports the projections that we provided last year. Capital is a little lower, but there's a story behind that. And then sales and base revenue track pretty well what we told them last year. In water and sewer, again, you see the impact of sales here. But in general, all of the same metrics are better than the metrics that we shared with them last year. Capital is pretty close. And of course, we had that 2.4% increase in KGAL sales, which resulted in revenue growth of 7.5%. So these will be great stories to be able to share for our financial results for last year. And that concludes this presentation.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dykes. A lot of information there. That was presented for information, not for a motion, but I'd open it up to the board for questions of Ms. Dykes. Mr. Petway?
I'm good.
Reverend
I
Newville?
do have a question. I know that on the electric side, there is a cap. I mean, we produce more electricity than we have customers. Is that correct? Or we have the potential?
We do. Now, I want to make sure I understand your question. From a total capacity perspective, we carry more capacity than we have peak needs to serve at any given time.
Right.
Some of that right now, as we sit here today, is because we've got, frankly, too much capacity.
Absolutely.
After January 5th, when we close the St. Johns River Power Park, we will come back in line with exactly how much capacity we need to carry to have the margin that's required by under the regulatory construct. So we are required to carry a 15% reserve. It's the peak that we have to serve plus 15%, and that's exactly where we'll be in January with the closure of Power Park.
And my question was really tied to water, because I noticed we've had a lot more rainfall, but the sales are going up.
Mm-hmm.
So what's creating those additional sales at the rate that we have?
So it's a couple of things, and it's a really interesting question, and I'll share my thoughts with you as I know them today, but I'll just caveat it by saying it's something we're still studying. Early in the year, it was very clearly tied to precipitation. We just weren't getting a lot of rain. It was very dry. The prior year had been a little wet, and so we were seeing a really gigantic difference year over year. A couple of things happened about halfway through the year. One is we pushed out a communications campaign to customers around conservation, which we think probably helped at the margin, and it also started raining, which helped. I'd like to think our communications campaign was very highly effective, but rain happens to be pretty powerful too. And so what's happening underneath all of that, though, is we're still growing number of customers. And so as our customer base on the water and sewer side is growing faster than on electric, because the service territory that we serve is a larger service territory. So as the number of customers that we have in the water and sewer system continues to grow, we do expect those sales to continue to grow. What'll be really interesting for us to watch is what happens to use per customer. Because we have that upward pressure on overall sales that's put by our number of customers. But for years, for almost a decade, we saw use per customer decrease almost every year. And that trend seems to be the one that's reversing. And it's loosening up. Maybe it's a combination of awareness and economic conditions. But it seems to be loosening up so that irrigation is by far the biggest increase year over year. And so that seems to be the driver of this increased use. But 1 year just isn't enough data yet for us to really have a deep understanding of what's going on.
Okay, thank you.
Great question. Mr. Cumber?
I'm good, thank you, Mr. Chair.
One quick question, Melissa. Continue to outperform budget on the weighted average interest rates on our outstanding debt. What's the projection? Again, I understand we can't totally forecast the market, but do you have any assumptions and projections based on the refundings, the advanced refundings we approved?
The projection on what's going to happen to the weighted average interest
Right.
rate, I don't know that off the top of my head. I'm sure that our Treasury team does have that projection, and I just don't know off the top of my head.
Somebody's raising their hand back there.
It is about 10% of our portfolio that we're talking about potentially refinancing.
Huge.
So it could make a big difference, we hope.
Okay. Positive.
Yes.
Yeah. No other questions. We'll excuse Ms. Dykes. Thank you for all your many reports. And the next item on the agenda is open discussion. As those of you in the audience know, we are subject to Florida's government and sunshine, so we as directors don't have an opportunity to talk to one another except in publicly noticed meetings. So I just open it up for comment or discussion. Mr. Cumber?
We just want to follow up. I know a couple meetings ago, we talked about the board getting a report on kind of follow-up to communications issues with the customers, and I didn't know if we had that kind of scheduled yet for staff to come back to us.
Talking about the issues around the hurricane communications?
Exactly.
Yeah, I think we'll look at January for follow-up. We came back with a brief update last meeting, and then just working through some of the investments required to, over the next number of years.
I'll tell you, Hussein, I've had 2 meetings with Carrie Stewart around that subject, and they are working on it, and have already adopted and implemented some changes for a go-forward basis to alleviate the miscommunication issues that we experienced during Irma. Reverend Newbill.
Yes, I would like to get clarification on my dear friend, Mr. Petway, in terms of whether or not he's going to be to our next meeting, or I know his time is coming short, so I don't know if that question is in order. I guess I should be asking.
What do you mean his time is growing short?
Well,
you mean service on this board?
My preacher, he knows what he's talking about. You better listen to my preacher.
Yeah, he's got a direct line. Yes, sir.
With your permission, Chairman, I do have a farewell address that I'd like to say to the end of the meeting.
Okay.
Since this is my last meeting, if you don't mind, I'd like to do that at the end.
We'll reserve time for you. Any other open discussion items, questions, or comments? Any new business? Any old business? Then we'll go to reports. First up is the Compensation Committee report. I'd note that Board Member Dolores Kessler is not feeling well, so she's unable to join us today. Ms. Brooks, will you give the report in her absence?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, I will. This is the report for the Compensation Committee, and the meeting was held yesterday, November 27th. In attendance were members Ms. Flanagan, Mr. Petway, and Mr. Howard, in Ms. Kessler's absence from that meeting yesterday, Ms. Flanagan chaired the committee meeting. Action was taken, if you look at tab 4A, are the items that were taken up by the committee yesterday. There was an adoption of the agenda, approval of the minutes from the January 6, 2017 committee meeting, approval of the fiscal year 2017 paper performance program, and approval of the fiscal year 2017 CEO performance, in which the Compensation Committee voted to award 10.69% in performance compensation to the CEO. There was discussion and direction given by the committee on the other two items. They were not action items, they were more for information and discussion, dealing with the fiscal year 2018 and beyond employee compensation and performance program, and the fiscal year 2018 and beyond CEO contract and CEO goals. There was a recommendation from the Compensation Committee to this board to move and approve the two main action items that were approved by the Compensation Committee meeting. Those are the approval of the fiscal year 2017 paper performance program and the approval of the fiscal year 2017 CEO performance, in which the Compensation Committee voted to award the 10.69% in performance compensation to the CEO.
Thank you very much, Ms. Brooks. Do we need to separately vote to approve the minutes? You've got to highlight as an action item here.
Right, those, so each of those items we should take up as action for each of those through this board.
Do we have a motion to approve the minutes of the Compensation Committee?
So moved.
Reverend Newbill, thank you, Mr. Cumber, for a second. Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Unanimously approved. So the fiscal year 2017 pay for performance program included in the agenda materials. Do I have a motion to approve that?
Move approval.
Thank you, Mr. Petway. Thank you for the second, Reverend Newbill. Any discussion? I would note, just for the record, I know this is a topic of interest to some people, the Pay for Performance program is an incentive program with specific objective metrics. Included among those are the RIR rate, customer satisfaction on residential electric, customer satisfaction on commercial electric, cost controls on both the electric, water, and wastewater systems. And these are stretch goals, and our entire JEA team works hard to achieve those goals. You can see they're stretch goals because we missed two of them. So the employees don't get the full amount of the bonus that they could get if they'd hit all the goals. But the most important of those is savings. This is a program that pays for itself. So if you don't hit the O&M savings, there's no money to pay the bonuses. And it's only a small fraction of those savings that's awarded to our employees under this. So kudos to our employees for achieving the goals that they did, and happy to share a portion of their savings back with them. Any other discussion or comments on the employee pay for performance program? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, approved. And then the last one is the fiscal year 2017 CEO performance. Have a motion to approve that award recommended by the committee.
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Cumber. Second by Reverend Newbill. Any discussion on that? Ms. Pelly.
I was just pointing to
Oh,
Mr.
Cumber.
Cumber.
I believe you said it was 10.69, and I'm assuming that was an add back for the key stakeholder relationships, and that's how we
Right.
got there.
That's correct.
Okay.
Again, just for the record, this is an award that's determined by objective metrics and the CEO's performance against objective metrics. The only line item that has any subjectivity is relationships with stakeholders. So again, built into his contract and the incentive program criteria that are very objective and easy to measure.
So the,
Yep.
oops, just one follow-up. So based on that, I think it's important for us to note as a board, because I know there's, obviously there's, discussion of what happened through the hurricane and stuff. I viewed that as being picked up under customer satisfaction. So when you go out and you do your JD Power exercise, which is, not subjective, if there were any concerns that ratepayers, whether it's residential or commercial, had with our performance during that, it would have been picked up under customer satisfaction. So I'm comfortable with the key stakeholder relations going up, since whatever impacts we had from a communication standpoint were most likely picked up under the satisfaction category.
Well, to your point, Mr. Cumber, you'll note that the potential 2.14, there was only 0.53 awarded, so about 25%
Correct.
grade there.
Correct.
Any other questions, comments, Ms. Petway?
Just for information purposes only, it's unfortunate that our chair, Dolores Kessler, couldn't be with us yesterday at this meeting and today at this meeting, but she supports all this. She's one of the foremost experts in my world on all this stuff, and she's couldn't be here today, and I can't speak for her, and she can't vote, but I just wanted the board to know that she's very supportive of the action that we're offering here today.
Thank you, Mr. Petway, appreciate that. Any other comments or discussion? All in favor of the 2017 CEO Performance Award, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. As Ms. Brooks noted, the other items under 4A are deferred until the December meeting. We're up to 4B. Mr. Petway, Government, Legal, and Real Estate Committee report.
I ask Mr. McElroy to make that report for us, please.
And thank you, Mr. Petway. The committee met a little over an hour yesterday as well. They did have one item for action, and that was item 4B3, real estate, well, actually, two action items. Let's go to 2A, real estate purchase and sale agreement for the Southside Generating Station. There was an update and a request for the extension. During the meeting, staff presented, and Ms. Brooks presented the recommendation to extend for 90 days till March 30th of next year for the purchase and sale agreement, with an extension to July 16th for closing documents. It was solely due, or I guess not solely, what was the word we used? Limited purpose.
And I have the definitions for those.
And then we can share those after the meeting. For the limited purpose of assigning the contract, and in this case, Elements would assign their rights of the contract to the city and to DIA. And then subsequently, the full development agreement will be worked out, will be participate in that. Proceeds, as the plan goes forward, would be from the city to us, and all of this has got to go before City Council to get all of the approvals necessary for it to move forward. But so the request really was a extension for 3 months to March 30th for the purpose of assigning the contract to the city and the DIA.
So, Mr. Petway, your committee approved and recommends to the board approval of the extension of the purchase and sale agreement as presented?
We do.
Thank you. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Reverend Newbill, seconded. Any further discussion?
Mr.
Cumber?
Chair, what's in the packet does not include the change that was made yesterday.
The words.
From sole to limited.
Yeah, in the recital C, there was a one-word change from sole to limited. Sole meaning one or only, limited meaning restricted in extent.
Okay.
I told you all yesterday, lawyers argue for hours about this stuff.
Yeah.
I'm afraid to ask how many hours Jody spent researching that, but I will.
Well, it was a good question you asked. We're just happy we have an answer.
Right.
And then the only thing I would add is, I think it's important to note that, and you mentioned this at the beginning, is the $250,000 deposit will become hard and will not count against the purchase price of the land, and that the board would still have to vote on the final agreement once it's assigned. So this isn't our only crack at making sure that, to comments made earlier, that the ratepayers are protected in this transaction.
Exactly. Thank you, Mr. Cumber. Ms. Petway?
Mr. Chairman, I'd just like to respond to Councilman Schellenberg's comments. I'm in accord and agree with, I think, everything he said. You're certainly welcome to meet with us. We'd love to have your input. But we're trying to be part of the solution here, and not have a problem that we're not happy with. We think we have a solution here that we would be happy with, that everybody will benefit from. So it's a short, in my judgment, it's a short extension. It's fair concessions have been made on both sides, and I recommend that we approve this.
Thank you, Mr. Pettway. Revenue bill.
Okay.
Any other discussion? I'll just echo the comments I made earlier in response to Councilman Schellenberg's observations that JEA is also concerned with the time delays here and the prospect of further extension. But as was noted, the change of the earnest money from soft to hard, no credit against the purchase price, and the fact that it's been constrained to an assignment and transaction with City of Jacksonville and DIA, which will give you an opportunity with your fellow council members to weigh in on the proposed change, gives us the comfort we need to approve the recommendation and request for a 90-day extension to allow that process to play itself out. So with no other discussion, I'll ask all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously.
The next item, the committee discussed and approved for the full board's recommendation, the real estate easement condemnation resolution for the Judith Avenue Force Main Improvement Project. This covers 5 parcels of land running south from our Greenland, roughly our Greenland generating station. It's a 24-inch, planned 24-inch sewer force main, very critical to reliability and the growth in the system in that part of the service territory. And so there are 5 parcels of land. 3 we've agreed on price and terms. 1 we're close to price and terms. There's a 5th parcel that's got some titling issues, and if necessary, to go the path of condemnation, it would clean up the titling on that piece of parcel of land, and the committee voted to bring that to the board for full action and approval.
Okay. So, Mr. Pettway, is that the approval and motion from your committee?
It is.
Is there a second to that?
Second.
Any questions regarding the easement condemnation proposal? No discussion. I'll ask all in favor to say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously.
The rest of the meeting centered on receiving reports on our various real estate acquisition activities. Additionally, there was conversation in terms of government relations at the local, state, and federal level. We did get an update on litigation matters, really the portfolio of litigation that's being managed. There were some positive reports on that, so that was relatively good news. And I think one area I missed for action was just the approval of the minutes from the May 11th meeting.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Pettway. All in favor of approving the minutes of the May 11 meeting, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Okay. That leads us to Managing Director's report. Mr. McElroy.
Well, first I'll start off by saying thank you to the board for the recognition of, I look at it more our team. Certainly the year and the performance that we had in 17 and in the years prior is due, I would say, solely to the great team, senior management team that JEA has. And I thank them as well. I'll use an example. Melissa suggested it a little bit in her report, but this advance refunding deal, this is where having a team, a senior executive team, such as the one that you have operating this organization for you, takes proactive action and is motivated by doing great things for JEA. They're not coming in each day and doing their job. They are looking for seeking ways to do things better, to save money, to generate value. This is an opportunity that the team could have easily said, it normally takes us 8 weeks to do this deal, maybe we can do it in 6 and we'll have to pass. And we would have lost the opportunity for millions and millions of dollars of savings. And quite frankly, there's nothing on the scorecard anywhere, not at JEA, not within the consolidated government, and not within the state of Florida or anywhere that would have captured that. So this is one example of the outstanding team effort of taking this on, doing this transaction in 3.5 weeks around the holiday time. Tremendous work involving a lot of external banks and rating agencies and lawyers. Then it'll be a great thing for JEA. I wanted to report that, and I could go through, there are a number, that was just an easy one, there are a number of Mike's team in electric system in terms of reliability, in terms of looking at the generating plant, things that Brian's team does every day, serving customers in Cary's area, always looking not in terms of behaving very much like a private sector business, being driven by performance management, and performance measures. I'll wrap up with Puerto Rico. We have fully deployed. All of our employees are back. Our trucks and equipment are due back in the port today or tomorrow. So we wrapped that up successfully, serving the Puerto Rican people. Got very high marks from those towns that we worked in terms of the performance of our teams. The citizens were absolutely wowed by the performance, and the PREPA, the local utilities. And in some way, the management was thrilled to see our productivity. I'm not quite sure the workforce was thrilled to see the level of productivity that can be done on a daily basis by our great team. So they worked almost 30,000 hours without a safety incident in unfamiliar territory and very, very difficult terrain as well. So they did a great job. We kicked off in the last 30 days our basically our whole employee cascade strategic initiative launch. We had about 300 members of the management team and their direct reports in an all-day meeting talking about the things we need to change going forward, not only just the next month or year, but the next years out, to keep us relevant and to keep our service and solutions to our customers current and adding value. We did end up in the last 30 days with a NERC audit, a North American Reliability Coordinating Council. This is as a delegated responsibility from FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They did audit our electric system operational and planning efforts to standards, and we got an extremely fantastic report from them. And that's a tribute to Mike and to Ted and their teams in doing that. I wish we should have filmed the exit meeting. It was one of the best, if not the best, exit meeting from any audit that I've ever had. The auditors had nothing but compliments to our team, to our processes, and what we have placed, and our performance. We're looking forward to a good week ahead with the rating agencies, and that's on my report, Mr. Chairman. Any questions?
Any questions for Mr. McElroy? We have a new bill? Mr. Petway? Mr. Cumber?
I'm good.
Well, I don't have a report. I'm going to yield the floor to Mr. Petway with some reluctance.
It won't be long, promise. Thank you, sir. I think you know by now that I will be leaving on December 31st, 2017. And because of the sunshine law that we all live with, I haven't had an opportunity to talk to anyone about my service here over the last 2 years. So, since I can't be at the December meeting, I thought I'd just try to take a few minutes here and just tell you how I feel about the last 2 years and maybe offer a challenge or two for the future. I've really been proud to work with you and Paul McElroy and his team. It's really been one of the great experiences of my life. I think we have faced a lot of challenges together and truly believe that we have made this a better place, made this organization a better organization. I would like to offer some observations that I've had over the last 2 years and maybe one recommendation through my lens, the lens of a Jacksonville businessman, an engaged citizen who has spent decades trying to improve the city, and a taxpayer. For posterity, and after 2 years of thinking about all this and trying to kind of review the 2 years and take a picture of where we are now, I have 8 things I'd like to share with you that I have observed about the JEA at this point in time. The JEA is at, number 1, JEA is at or very near peak performance. 2, JEA has assets which are operated by exceptional people. JEA has significantly improved the balance sheet over the last few years. JEA is one of the most valuable assets of the city of that the city of Jacksonville owns. 5, the JEA success is built on a tremendous amount of capital invested by the citizens of Jacksonville. 6, the current marketplace for utility service is vastly different than it was when the JEA was created in 1967. The majority of the people in Florida, including most urban cities, most urban centers, are served in a private sector marketplace. 7, the private sector marketplace is competitive and well regulated by the Florida Public Commission. 8, I believe the JEA board shall evaluate where the JEA fits in this emerging private marketplace of utility companies. So as I exit, I have 2 questions nagging me, and I'd like to leave with you and have you worry about. 1, would the customers of JEA and the people of Jacksonville be better served in the private marketplace? And 2, should the JEA and the city of Jacksonville consider the financial benefits that would come from the privatization of JEA? To answer these questions, I encourage the board to request the CEO and the JEA team for a report on JEA's financial value in the private marketplace. The JEA board would then be prepared to consider, where does JEA fit in the private marketplace? I think it's a question that we will be asked, and I think we should be prepared for an answer based on a good, solid investigation of the ramifications of that. Finally, I want to thank Mayor Curry for giving me the opportunity to serve on the JEA Board of Directors. It has indeed been a pleasure to serve with each of you, and it is one of my great life experiences that I can recall. Thank you very much.
Mr. Petway, I've known you for 25 years, and I can honestly say that Jacksonville has very few corporate citizens who have given so selflessly of their time to our city over that period.
Thank you.
And that continued with your service here at JEA. No one, besides perhaps Paul, knows how many hours you put in service to this organization over the last 2 years. You were up here all the time, and always striving to make JEA a better utility for our citizens.
Right.
And I couldn't agree more with everything that you said in your 8 points. You've given the board a lot to think about and a challenge in considering JEA's role in the changing marketplace. I expect that Mr. McElroy and his team will take up that challenge, evaluate our prospective position in the marketplace, and report back on what the private market value of JEA may be, so that the citizens of Jacksonville and the mayor and other constituencies, city council, could evaluate that opportunity.
Very good. Thank you.
So let me just ask that the others join me in thanking you for your service. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
We're adjourned.
Oh, man, I shouldn't say